This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And greetings once again, Mike Linder, publisher of E&P Magazine. Housekeeping as usual. Listening to us on podcasts, by all means follow us. Watching us on YouTube, please subscribe. There is a button below me, bell to the right. If you hit that, you'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of this vodcast series, E&P Reports. I have a good friend with me, Kevin Rehberg. Kevin, you're VP of Client Development of the Alliance of Audited Media. You've been on programs before. You've been at conferences I've hosted. Where do we find you today, Kevin?
I'm out of my home office here in Odessa, Florida, Mike.
Okay, I'm so glad to have you on. I'm also honored that you introduced me to Dr. Beth Potter, Regional Manager, USA Journalism Trust Initiative. And Beth, may I call you Beth, or do I have to be Dr. Potter today?
That would be wonderful.
Okay. You're actually part of an organization called Reporters Without Borders, correct?
Yes.
And international organization, and are you pretty much in charge of the entire North American region?
I am, but I think that Paul worked with somebody named Michel Cormier, and so we all have worked together only for a few short months. So I'm still learning my job, but yes, all of the United States. We'll
learn together. And then you mentioned Paul Samyn. Paul, you've been with the Winnipeg Free Press for how long? I think almost 20 some odd years?
34 years, but Mike, if you add in my time as a paper boy, a little longer.
You must have started when you were 2 then, because you do not look. Paul,
this has been my only gig. If I lose this job, you're going to see me as a greeter at Walmart.
Paul, you are, is it editor-in-chief or just editor? Which title do they give you up there? Editor of the Winnipeg Free Press. It's funny, Paul, our publisher of the year this year was pretty much only at one job her entire career, too. There's nothing wrong, do you understand, of staying in one place. You don't have to be this good person that's constantly moving and jibing, but correct me if I'm wrong, the Winnipeg Free Press used to be part of Thomson. Were you there in those days?
It was part of Thomson. I was a part of my pension will come from Thomson. We are currently essentially a local ownership group that purchased the newspaper in 2001 from Thomson.
It's funny, but I used to joke that if you meet anyone that works in Canada publishing, they've worked for Thomson at least once in their career. So join the club, sir. But we're here to talk about something really exciting that I'm just learning about, but it's been around since 2018, the Journalism Trust Initiative. And if my panel will just stick around for a few seconds, we're going to talk JTI on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
All right, Paul, I'm going to put you aside for a second, but we're not going to turn off your video. So try to act like you're interested, because I want to first talk to Beth. Is that okay? Paul, we're going to get to you. I got an order here. I promise you, you're going to have your moment. But Beth, I want to learn a little bit more about Reporters Without Borders and the Journalism Trust Initiative. I've done my Reporters Without Borders has been around since 1985, but the JTI, the Journalism Trust Initiative, is pretty new. Am I correct?
Yes.
Tell me about the Journalist Trust Initiative. What is the mission? What I saw here is you're trying to help define what journalism is versus fake news. May I use that term?
Yes. So I would say that I just want to take a step backwards. I was a journalist for almost 30 years as well. And it's so gratifying when you are interacting with people you're working with. I was working at three community newspapers right here in Colorado. And the people don't realize that there's the fake news misinformation out there now. And so when you tell them something like, you really have to be able to tell that this is trusted, verified news, they would look at me and say, oh, well, I found you on Facebook. Right. So this is a huge issue. I went back to school to say, how can we solve these problems? And I was lucky enough to find the people from Reporters Without Borders working with the Journalism Trust Initiative. So what it is so many of the local news websites across the country now are going out of business because of social media, everything that we see online, and pink slime sites are taking over kind of this area of interest from consumers, right? Because they're looking for news. They don't find whatever they're looking for. And so then something else pops up and they say, oh, right, this looks interesting. So there are now more than 1,200 pink slime sites. We are combating that. We are saying we are journalists. We are the ones who are actually doing the real work and serving you, the public, and you can get what you need from the traditional websites that you always did. And it's going to be online or wherever you get your news, like you were saying, but that it's really, really important to be able to distinguish between the two of them. So
I have never heard the metaphor pink slime before.
Pink slime is just becoming kind of a term, and I think I did some research more. Kevin was the first one who kind of turned me onto it in July. We were doing a workshop and Kevin showed a pink slime site. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know those things existed.
All right, talk to me, Kevin. Kevin from the AAM Association. Yes. What is pink slime? I know I'm an editor of a publisher of a magazine, but I haven't heard the term. Define pink slime, Kevin.
You know what, Mike? It comes from how chicken nuggets are made, how bad chicken nuggets are made. Pink slime is the goo that they put into the processors to make like really, really bad chicken nuggets. So that translates to news, because news is kind of the same way. You could go to a steak restaurant and get a fantastic chicken entree, but you could also get that. There's plenty of options where you can pull into a drive-thru and get some pink slime chicken nuggets too. And news isn't really any different from that, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I use the metaphor of this: when a news desert is created, and you're right, Beth, one of the reasons that newspapers or news publishing entities go out of business is because big tech takes away about 75% of all local advertising revenue now, doesn't compensate the media industry for their monetization of that revenue. The JCPA recently, the journalism, professor, we call it the Safe Harbor Bill, yes, doesn't look good right now. But you up in Canada there, Kevin, you got, Paul, you got a shot, right? It looks like the Canadian news publishing industry will be getting compensated from big tech. Am I getting that correct, sir? Are you?
Yeah, well, in theory, that's what's been working through from a legislative standpoint. But the other thing, too, is that the federal government has been providing additional supports to newspapers, partly, recognizing what you enunciated there. The challenge for our industry is how much the Facebook and the Googles and the TikToks have been siphoning off from an advertising revenue, which we need, and recognizing the importance of newspapers in terms of the health of our democracy. So there is money coming towards the Winnipeg Free Press and other newspapers across the country from the federal government, and they're not just doling the money out willy-nilly. You have to be sort of what's called an accredited journalistic organization, and it's tied to the number of employees in our newsroom. So for the last few years, there has been money that's coming in, and it's ensured that our newsroom hasn't had to shrink, and in some cases has allowed us to grow, to continue to do more, because I think the public, certainly over the course of the pandemic, has needed to have more places they can go to find out information that they need to know and information that they can trust.
Now, I am not a student of the Canadian government system, but you just poked the bear on an issue here. You said that your government will give money to what they call an accredited news publishing organization. I'm sure I'm not using the words correctly, but then you said quickly, based on the number of employees. Is there any other basis that your government uses to define you as a credible news source?
Well, what they're looking at is there's a number of different metrics that you have to jump through, and there's the ability for them to audit what we're doing.
The government.
Government, yes.
Okay.
So government, it was set up, there it was an independent industry association, and our former publisher was instrumental in the establishment of it, so that, and the newspapers, big and small, were getting an additional revenue stream coming to them. And I think what's important for your audience is to recognize that while this is different from how things work in the United States, it's not dissimilar from how it has worked in Canada and other countries. So currently, our public broadcaster, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, gets about $1.2 billion from Ottawa. The BBC, again, another example, probably your listeners would be familiar with, is there's money coming from the national government in Britain. So there is a different funding model here that we've been able to tap into that I think is just recognition of the reality that we face. But
I've got to bring this up. You get the money, and this is not, and I'm not by no means being judgmental on this, but you get the money because your government declares you as a credible journalistic entity. A blogger with cats on her lap operating out of a basement, creating some form of blog is not accredited, correct?
Okay.
In other words, the government is making a determination of what news is.
Yes.
I assume the funding is unfettered. See, I'm bringing this up because of the U.S. Constitution. A free, independent, unfettered press means we have a challenge in our society where the government is not involved at all. Does that make sense?
But on a second, Mike, government still is buying ads in newspapers, is it not?
Yes.
Okay,
We
so
get
there
state
is
money. We just had a big story about how Arkansas was actually pulling university funding of any media company that was lobbying in a certain direction, and we exposed that. See, you're right. The governments do spend money. There's no question, but can they dictate the content? Your funding is unfettered, correct? There is no dictation of what.
No oversight. There is no sort of recourse if they didn't like what the Free Press did or didn't do, or any of the other newspapers. And I want to make clear that the concerns that you're raising are certainly concerns that were raised when this was moving through our parliament and our industry, and indeed in our newsroom. Staff asking me, Paul, does this compromise us? And to try and onto that, there was, because the industry association, Canada's newspaper industry, were heavily involved in this effort and had set up an expert panel outside to try and help guide this, to try and ensure there were guardrails in place and the concerns that were out there were properly addressed, so that the journalistic integrity of the Free Press and other places was not being compromised.
Okay, this is funny. I had a whole agenda here. Now we're starting, and I blew it because I am starting with Paul. So we will stay with Paul, and I'm now going to read Paul's words from an editorial or an op-ed, whatever you want to call it, you wrote in February of 2022. For years, any correspondence I have with readers usually ends with these words: I hope we continue to earn your trust. Mm-hmm. Paul, that's brilliant. That is who you are. You are the editor of a voice of a community that if you lose the trust, you're dead. Do you agree, sir? That is,
I would agree. Absolutely.
So and you say, you go on, the Free Press's reputation, our reach and revenue. You're a brilliant writer. I'm not blowing you smoke, but I love the way because reach and revenue go hand in hand, right? If we don't have a sustainable business model, we're dead. All depend on trust. Agreed. A strong Manitoba depends on a strong newspaper like the Free Press to deliver information. In today's confusing and complicated media landscape, credibility is critical to sustainability. I love this. We're going to republish this. I haven't talked to you about that. That's why we've taken the step to certify with the Journalism Trust Initiative. So, Paul, those are your words. And then you decided that even though you're working every day to maintain trust in your community, you wanted a certificate. You wanted some organization to reaffirm, Kevin, that he's not, what color slime is that? Pink slime?
Pink slime, yeah.
Okay. Which no one would ever accuse you of, because you're your newspaper started over 100 years ago.
150 this year, Mike. We're the oldest newspaper in Western Canada.
There you are. Okay, now, this defining pink slime versus 150-year-old news entity, that is where the JTI, the Journalism Trust Institute, comes in, backed by Reporters Without Borders. Now, that brings back Beth. Beth, on your website, you say the problem is there's no level playing field for journalism versus fake news. The solution is empowering trustworthy news with competitive advantage. And then you have a 3-step process, am I correct, to help a journalistic entity get this certificate. And that's where AAM comes in. But let's stay with Beth, then we'll bring in Kevin. So Beth, the 3-step process, what is that? How would one of our companies right now that is listening to this program say, I want to get certified as a journalistic entity?
Mm-hmm. So as we know, because we're all in this industry, journalists have standards that are unreal. They're kind of like being, a doctor or something, right? The journalists say we have conflict of interest policies. We have a code of ethics that says first, do no harm. We have corrections policies. So people know when we do something wrong, we immediately correct it. All of these things that we do as journalists are huge, right?
But they're self-defined, not by government. We self-define that.
We self-define them, yes.
Right.
So
and go ahead.
So it is pretty important, actually, that we are based in Europe, because the European Commission got all these journalists together to discuss this. What are these standards that everybody agrees on? And they came up with this set of standards that you go through online on our website at JTI app. And then you do a self-assessment of all of these standards. You put in the information about what it is in terms of your code of ethics. Most people use the SPJ code of ethics, for example, various things that we know that we do. Okay, so you have your self-assessment, you've gone through, you said, oh, maybe we didn't really define our conflict of interest policy, but in our newsroom, we never take more than a $5 cup of coffee. That's all we're willing to take from outside people, right? So, okay, so we're on to the first piece, the self-assessment, right? After you do your self-assessment, then you can publish it as a transparency report. And the Winnipeg Free Press, I think, went through these 3 steps. You publish your transparency report online so everybody out in the world can see, yes, we follow these. We're being transparent about all these things that we do, right? So that's the second step, transparency report. And then what the secret sauce is, I think, for us is the Alliance for Audited Media is going to look at them and make sure that actually you do those things that you say you do. So I want to give you an example. So that's the third piece, right? So we have—
I get it. Self-assessment, public disclosure, then independent audit. Those are your secret sauce. Those are the 3
independent
things.
audits is the secret sauce, because there are several trust initiative kind of projects out there. And all of the trust projects are saying, hey, audience, these journalists are showing they're transparent, and so you should love them. Right. What we have actually is somebody who's saying, yes, these people actually do the things that they say that they do. And the reason that's important, I want to give you an example, is I'm based in Colorado. There is a blog called Campfire Colorado. And the blogger says, hey, I'm media, I'm right-wing media, and I'm really important, and you should read me. Why can't I be accepted just like everybody else into the Society of Professional Journalists? Well, the reason is because we think to ourselves that journalists have conflicts of interest when they get a lot of funding from specific sort. You were just saying, like, if you get funding from the government, do you have a conflict of interest if the government starts telling you what to do, right? So Campfire Colorado gets a lot of money from kind of partisan sources and said, well, that's okay. We can list that on our website, right? And people would say, well, then who is backing this aspect of journalism? So as our industry goes through a lot of turmoil, you might have an argument about maybe in the future, maybe we will accept, yes, they're being transparent about those funding sources. But what we're saying is that you wouldn't actually, if you have a conflict of interest and you have to have membership, that the membership is disclosed as, people who donate a certain amount of money, or your subscriber numbers are, an X number of subscribers, or all the things that we think about related to traditional media.
I'm just going to play devil's advocate right now.
Yes.
That there is likely someone who leans very far to the right listening to you going, how dare you? Knight Foundation leans very left, although they don't. I'm just playing devil's advocate. Nobody from the Knight Foundation should right now. I didn't believe what I just said. I'm just saying that. So how dare you? What if it does come from a Steve Bannon, a Breitbart funder? I mean, where's that free speech? See, that's the argument of the right.
Yes.
You understand?
The beauty, I picked a partisan example.
No, it's okay. I get it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm just feeding you. Go
the
ahead.
The beauty of the Journalism Trust Initiative is that you're being transparent about all of your standards, that we have agreed that one of the standards of a journalism industry is that you have a conflict of interest policy. So if you do have a conflict of interest policy and you say, when we accept all of this money from conservative partisan political aspects, then that is not a standard that fits into our transparency, our European Commission standard. You can still publish it. You can be transparent and do the step 2. But when you go through the auditing process with AAM, they're going to say, hey, conflict of interest policies across the world say journalists should be independent of the people they cover. That's one of the tenets of journalism that we.
Now I get it, because over the last 15 months on this very platform on E&P Reports, I've had Scott Yates, who started this thing called journalist.net, where he got into this whole idea of how we can put a coded file directly into our websites that will be crawled. And in that file, you list all the organizations you're members of. And if you're a member of this and that will eventually be found by the search engines properly. Then, of course, we also had the guys on from NewsGuard. I don't know if you've heard of Gordon Kravitz and Steve Brill, who said, we'll just judge you. I mean, we have a scale of 1 to 100, and we give you a nutrition label based on our committee of brainiacs. What you've added to your sauce is 2 things. Public disclosure. I like this because you got to understand, I come from broadcasting. In radio and television, we get a license from the federal government. We have to have a public file. And then every time we're getting our license renewed, we have to say, I'm sure you've heard these on radio and TV. Come and inspect our file. Do you see what I'm saying? We're doing our job to support the community. Newspapers have never had to do that because they don't lease spectrum, if I'm making sense. But then you add Kevin. Kevin, you've been very quiet lately, which is not like you, especially.
Right.
I've seen you in many stages, sir. So you at AAM, and I want to tee this up right. Why do we have an audit? The answer is simple. Advertisers have to have trust in what media reports. So you are an independent audience entity that's major function until now was to make sure that when an advertiser is placing advertising within a media company, that audience that they're claiming is true. I'm saying this like a 5-year-old, but that's AAM's mission to date, correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Now you've added this new thing. You have blessed JTI. In a way, you're saying, okay, this model works for us. Let them do a self-assessment. That goes back to Paul at the Winnipeg Press. Paul, you didn't hold up your right hand the whole time you're filling that thing out, right? But we have to trust you, right? You didn't say, I pledge now at this moment, under God, to do all that. But you filled out all the criteria. We do this, we do that, we police this, we look at both sides, we have journalistic ethics, we separate editorial from op-ed from news, right, Paul? That was kind of what you filled out.
It was a lengthy process, Mike. This wasn't just ticking a couple of boxes and sending it away. This went over a period of months, the back and forth.
You're serious?
Yes.
No wonder you wrote that. You're proud of what you did. You're saying, look, I think
being trusted, Mike, is something that should be a point of pride, and it is something that allows us to have the strength to serve our readership. And what is lovely about this initiative here is that there's something the public can look to say, is this a news organization that I'm going to spend my time and in our case, time with?
And that's based on journalistic.
In this world, this confusing world, we need those things.
But okay, the basis of that, because you got to look at both sides of the argument. The basis on that is on basic journalistic integrity. That brings in what Beth was saying, that we know based on ourselves, our own ethics and policing ourselves, that we have policies as journalists. Beth, let me ask you a question. When you tune on cable news, do you always see journalism?
I talk to my students about this now that I actually am a professor as well, and the students don't understand why cable news, they don't know anything about the fairness doctrine or anything in the background behind that. I mean,
Which was
we can have a
killed.
long discussion about kind of government regulation and government policy that is not going in the direction that we ever thought it would, right?
No, the fairness doctrine was killed. Yes, I know.
Yeah. So I want to bring up another aspect of why this is so important. In Europe, actually, they are going toward more regulation. I know you said that that's anathema to all the people in the United States, the free speech crowd, but in Europe, they have something called the Digital Services Act.
Yes.
Digital Services Act says you have to follow these policies, big tech, or you will get fined, right? Now, we know the big tech companies make a ton of money, so maybe they say, oh yeah, it's just a drop in the bucket, we'll take the fine. But over time, this is really, really important, because if you are trustworthy and you have these standards that you're following, then the big tech companies will support you. They'll say, oh my gosh, we want those people to rise to the news outlets to rise to the top of searches and get more page views. So
what an apropos time to bring that up now that we've got Twitter going ape. I was going to use a bad term, going ballistic right now. Okay, so now we bring in Kevin. Kevin, AAM, one of the top most credited, I'm using accreditation, but respected independent auditing. We have a long association with you as well. You're like the top gold standard of auditing. Why'd you pick JTI?
I mean, we've been separating quality news media from everything else for over 100 years. That's what AAM has. That's why AAM came into being as an industry nonprofit, because the industry needed someone to shine a spotlight on quality media and separate it from everything else. So when we saw the Journalism Trust Initiative come along, we thought this is right in our wheelhouse. This is something that we really need to help out with. Number one, just from an industry perspective, to support the industry, but also because this fits so well with our own mission. So really, I mean, what we've done is in partnering with the Journalism Trust Initiative, we're one of the certifiers that
one of the certifiers. Okay, there are others.
Yeah, yes, and that's important to point out too, because that's how impartial the JTI process is. You can choose multiple certifiers if you'd like to. Us being an industry nonprofit, we like to think that we're going to come in at a price point that would probably be lower than everybody else, and also we have a mission that's more tied directly to the JTI clients than probably any of the other certifiers would be. So
Paul, you chose AAM. It was your choice, correct, to certify your document.
They use Deloitte because they were actually they were being one of the pioneers in this. They got through this before AAM. Here's one other great thing about this, Mike. The Alliance for Audited Media had to essentially undergo an audit to become a certifier for JTI. So the auditors had to, we as an organization had to prove to an outside organization that we are a legitimate auditing agency, who our board of directors is. We had to be fully transparent with them as well. So we were certified with ANAB, which is an accrediting body, so that we could prove to the industry that we also have our impartiality intact. So while we were going through that process, Winnipeg Free Press was moving forward with their accreditation.
But now you're in there.
Now we are.
And you're the one that turned me on to this whole thing. Here's how I see it. Here's how I see it, Beth. Again, Europe came through. I am biased. I think big tech should pay. I get put down by that. I've editorialized about that. I'm mad about the JCPA because I come from radio, and in radio, every song you play, the composer gets compensated, period. Until it becomes public domain, which I think is like 75 years. I think Happy Birthday is now free. I mean, and why shouldn't the publisher get compensated when that song, that story is being monetized, period? You walk into a restaurant, you hear music in the background, that composer is getting compensated. So I'm always been in this place. Europe, who is embracing taking on big tech, has come up with this JTI through Reporters Without Borders, which is very independent, multicultural, correct? If I'm wrong. Canada is now coming on board. And Beth, let me get this straight. Your mission is to get this whole initiative, with Kevin's help, infused into the United States. Is that pretty much it?
It is, but I just want to take a step back again and say, actually, we think of Europe and the United States being slightly different, obviously, in kind of the government ethos and free press and free speech and things like that. But in fact, the internet is global. So the first thing that we saw from the Digital Services Act actually is on our computers. Every time you look at a new website, you get something that says accept, deny cookies. That's part of the privacy information behind the Digital Services Act. So this isn't, something that we're saying, oh my gosh, that's way far away in Europe. Oh my gosh, this is the United States and we do these things. The internet already has created kind of certain things that are related to the Digital Services Act that I think will just grow and grow and grow.
I have clients that I work with in Europe who think we are idiots here, that we're tripping over our Constitution too much. In other words, we're taking it too literally. Founding fathers were brilliant, imperfect, brilliant men who wrote a perfect document, but it's fluid. It can be adjusted. It can be worked with. Right now, it's crazy. I agree with you. And it's, I just think things are advancing quicker in other countries than here. My question to you, Beth, is how do you do this? I mean, you got your voice now, scream it out. Because we're getting to the end of our journey here. We're at 30 some odd minutes. Tell my audience what they can do today to finally get some form of accreditation. I mean, Paul here just said it's pretty darn hard. They're going to have to spend some energy on this. Make your pitch, Beth. Go ahead. You got the microphone.
We as journalists, and I am a former journalist, have this ethos, and we're not really marketing ourselves well enough. We're not saying, oh my gosh, all these things are happening one way or the other. We need to stand up and be proud, say we have these standards. There's a reason why we do the things we do. And if that's true, then you can just put the self-assessment only takes, 15 or 20 minutes to go through and say, yeah, we do those things in our newsroom. Yeah, I do have the code of ethics hanging on the wall. Yes, I have a conflict of interest policy when somebody goes out and tries to buy me a drink. So if that's true, all I need is for people to actually say, we're going to stand up as a group, as a whole industry, and say, this is what we're proud of. This is why we're important. And to the big tech companies, we're bargaining as a group of people with the big tech companies.
And so you welcome right-wing media as well, as long as they hold to a code of ethics, correct?
I welcome any media that's willing to follow standards. So, whoever it is, they would say, yes, we want to belong to your group because we are people who should be recognized in the world, right? So Kevin would go through then and he would decide, or not Kevin personally, but, somebody at AAM actually would go through their process and we would see. It would be great to have somebody actually go through the process and see what happens, because Paul, as Paul will tell you, is, well, and I think you did, Paul, say it's pretty detailed, and so you're explaining things that you do, and then they also check to see that you do the things that you say that you do, right? So if you say our corrections policy is that we do a correction if we make a mistake within 24 hours, for example, then I think AAM will go and check and say, oh yeah, in this case, they never printed a correction, so they weren't transparent about the process. So I'm just picking like a very
I got it.
Easy example, but it could be something about the fact versus opinion thing you're saying, like labeling an op-ed or something. You say that you label that information and you're a right-wing media and you're labeling something as opinion, then Kevin will say, yeah, they do label it. That's great. They are an accredited or in a transparent organization.
Paul,
so I welcome any right-wing group to come, or not right-wing, but any media to come and say, yes, these are our standards and this is why we actually can be recognized.
Paul, what do you think about the current state of media in the United States as a Canadian journalist? I just want to get your opinion.
Well, I mean, obviously, I consume a lot of American news as part of my daily routine, and I think there's some outstanding journalism that is going on in your country as there is elsewhere. And I think that's to Beth's point. We need to find a way to help the public understand places when they see something, can they trust it? Okay, and so we've got amazing stuff here and a lot of scary stuff down there.
Yeah.
How are we going to help people? So, it was an interesting point early in the discussion. In this digital age, borders don't matter. So anyone can Google something. They're looking for something, say that involving, say, the Winnipeg Jets, and they come across a story from the Winnipeg Free Press. They look at it, go, that seems really interesting, but I'm not familiar with the Winnipeg Free Press. Do I trust it? Okay. The accreditation is just one more thing that the public can turn to say, okay, someone's done some background checking and allowed this organization to get this seal. All right. And I think we're at the point, because we can Google the heck out of everything. And are we going to be getting something that we can trust? Are we going to get something that is wrong, or are we going to land on something that is fundamentally trying to spread mischief and misinformation? And we can say we should go back to the old ways. The Pandora's box is been open forever, and the reality is, can we, who are organizations that believe or have certain journalistic standards, can we make sure that the public is aware of that? And I think that works in Canada. I think it works in Europe. And there are any number of organizations in the United States, I'm sure, who would be, certainly having gone through the process, would get that stamp of approval. And that probably is going to help American society at large.
We're going to leave it on that, because Paul, that was amazing. And we will allow you to say the word process wrong too on this program, okay? And you can spell color any way you want to. All right.
Sounds good.
Okay, but let's let Kevin, if you are well connected in this industry, especially here in the US, if anyone wants to learn more about going through the JTI process with that eventual final accreditation and auditing, can they reach out to you, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. Myself, Beth, we could have a quick chat and walk you through a few more of the details about what's involved. It's less than you think, really, because most quality news organizations already have 95 to 100% of these processes in place, and most of you have it already documented too. So it's just a matter of getting it into the JTI portal and subjecting it to an independent third party.
Beth, how do they reach out to you? What website do they go to?
We have our JTI website, right? So JTI, I would love them to go and just look immediately at what the areas of that we've just been talking about, conflict of interest, code of ethics, etc. You can just go through and check your own news organization, say, oh, do that. Oh, we also have something related to that, right? So
there you go. Journalism Trust Initiative. You can just Google it. It's right there. Yeah. Kevin, your email address.
Kevin.Rehberg@auditedmedia.com.
Rehberg. Beth Potter, your email address.
bpotter@rsf.org.
There you go. And Paul, if anyone wants to reach out to you and just argue about journalism, why don't you give us your contact information?
I'm paul.samyn. I'll spell that SAM as in mother, YN as in Norman, at freepress.mb.ca. But just go to winnipegfreepress.com. Read, enjoy, and see that accreditation seal of approval.
I enjoyed the journey through your website this morning. It's rocking. Dr. Beth Potter, thank you for your valuable time. Regional Manager, USA Journalism Trust Institute, part of Reporters Without Borders. Kevin Rehberg, my good friend, VP Client Development, Alliance of Audited Media. Paul Samyn, editor of the Winnipeg Free Press. Yes, sir. The last, by the way, yes, the last letter in the alphabet is Z. We will accept that as well. We are honored to have all of you with us. We are looking forward to reporting more in the JTI initiative. And by all means, keep us abreast here at E&P. Thanks for your valuable time.
Thank you, Mike.